You are listening to the Love Unplugged podcast, episode 4. Today's episode is all about marriage and how my guests have overcome struggles in their relationship, but most importantly, how they learn to communicate effectively with each other. Now you're in for a treat because today's guest had so much amazing advice and experiences to share that I'm excited to say that today you will be hearing part 1 of our chat with part 2 made available next week. So stay tuned because you won't want to miss it. You are listening to Love Unplugged, a podcast focused on love in all its forms. I'm your host, Jessica Frigon, hopeful romantic and founder of Revue Blanc. I've found that too often love is set aside or taken for granted, and we tend to forget how to care for ourselves and our relationships in the day-to-day chaos. So let's slow down, tune in, and begin our journey of rediscovering love. From honest heart-to-heart conversations with real couples and knowledgeable guests, to deep dive reviews of new products and services that will help you feel beautiful inside and out. If you're looking for relatable advice or wanting to be inspired by real life love stories, you've come to the right place. Without further ado, let's get to it. Hi there, everybody. I am here with Emily and Lane Cuthbert, wedding officiants, entrepreneurs, but ultimately a lovely couple married for over 8 years. So today we're going to learn all about their love story and how they help couples start theirs. So welcome, Emily and Lane. I am so honored to have you as my guests, and I'm so excited to learn all about your love story and your careers. Mm-hmm. But before we start, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your story for those that don't know you.
Sure.
Want me to start?
That would be great.
Okay. So, we've been married it'll be 9 years this year, which is crazy. I can't believe it.
Time flies. Today is our 3-year-old's birthday.
Yep.
And we were looking at pictures the other day and we're like, we've turned into our parents and we start saying statements like, where did the time go?
Actually, though. So we have 2 little girls. We have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old today, Emerson and Evie, and they're amazing. They're ridiculous. It's pretty awesome. We have known each other, though, for 12 years?
I think including our dating, we said we're like 12 or 13 years that our whole relationship has been.
So we met in high school. Lane had already graduated from university and he was working, saving up money to go to school abroad. So he had like 6 months where he was kind of working but didn't really have a set schedule. And so he would always show up at my high school. And so it was so random. And he had mutual friends at high school. And so we would just kind of like see each other in passing. And then we ended up, and I knew of him. We were from a smaller town. So I knew of him just like through mutual friends. And then one night we saw each other at like a local like youth group concert that we were at. And he asked me for my number. And I think we can't actually remember.
We were trying to dig back on like who made the first move. And it was like,
I think it was Lane, but I can't remember.
But coffee, there was an invite for coffee and we went for coffee.
Yeah. And Lane, Lane always jokes that I was pretty intentional from the get-go.
When I talk to a lot of couples, I will love asking the question like, when did you know that this is the person you wanted to marry? And I always tell people the moment that I knew I wanted to marry her was our first date started at 7 at Starbucks. We stayed until Starbucks closed. And then we hung out for another couple hours after that. So after we've been hanging out for 4 or 5 hours, she looks me in the face and she's like, where's this going? And she's like, don't waste my time. If you aren't interested or you're just going to mess around, she's like, you can leave now. And I was like, this is the moment. I know I want to marry her right now. She's so confident and it scares the heck out of me, but I love that she knows what she wants. And I'm like, that's the moment. So it took several years after that, some dating, some breaking up and getting back together. But that was the moment for sure.
Yeah, I never felt, I had always been instilled in me since I was young that like any guy that had the opportunity to be a part of my life was lucky. And not in a sense of like that I was amazing, but in a sense that I'm worthy enough to have a great partner. And so I was
or to be treated with love and respect.
Totally. Yeah. And absolutely. So I had a very confident personality in terms of saying, I don't want to be hanging out with someone that has no intention of pursuing a relationship with me. And I mean, I was 17, so I was pretty young to be in that position, but that's just the person that I was and that I am. And so
still are.
Yeah. So, yeah, we always joke that Lane's the much more emotional person in our relationship, and I'm quite definitive in who I am. So usually you know how I feel. But yeah, so we dated, like Lane said, you know, for another, 5 years, 6 years. We broke up for about a year. And then when we got back together, we got married quite quickly. We got back together in July or August.
The way that our breakup went, we were like, if we ever get back together, it'll only be because we're in this for the long haul.
Yeah.
And so when we got back together, it was like, yeah, we're not going to mess around. So I think 3 or 4 months after we got back together,
we were engaged. And then we were married in August. So yeah. So it's been, it's been 9 years of, it's been awesome. But
it's quite the story.
Yeah, I know.
So a question about this confidence that you have. A lot of women kind of struggle with that, and they kind of don't have those standards for themselves and for the partner that they choose to be with. Did you learn that from your family or your mom? Or
I definitely grew up in an environment where, you know, I was always encouraged as a young woman. I had like a great parents. I had a sense of that my value wasn't based on my outward looks. It wasn't based on, you know, and I had confidence in I had self-esteem in how I looked and my appearance and those types of things. But I think it also comes from a place of protection. And I think when I was 17 years old, and I've learned this through having children and different things. Like I definitely am I would say like naturally I would want to control things. I would want to have the control of things. And so while yes, it was confident, but there was also a sense of if I allow someone to get too close to me, then I get hurt by that. And so I wasn't necessarily scared for someone to say, you know what, I don't see a future. Then I was like, okay, that's totally fine. You can move on. But I also had a sense of I wanted to protect myself a little bit too. And so, but I do think that I never felt like I should feel guilty for, you know, I don't know how to say it. It's kind of funny to put into words. But
I think now the best way that we could put it into words for you, because in your parents' relationship, your mom is very confident.
Yeah.
She's like high level of government. Like she's very driven in career. Mm-hmm. So there's sort of been this role switch in their dynamic where it's like both of them work, but dad is home a lot more. He's taking care of a lot more of the house duties, and mom is actually like advancing her career and pressing on. And so growing up in that household, I think it was like, oh, okay, like not to say that there's anything wrong with being, a stay-at-home mom or housewife or anything like that, but I think she just had higher ambitions from the beginning, and I think that just flowed over to her relationships as well to say, I know what I want in life, or maybe if I don't have all the answers, I'm driven enough to find out what I want.
And I wasn't necessarily scared to take risks. I've never been someone that said this is too scary to kind of put myself out there. Like that's never been something that I've struggled with. I've always been like, I'd rather have said yes to the chance than to say no. So, you know, but I also was someone that I didn't want to hang out with someone for 6 months and then have that person be like, yeah, no, I'm not really interested in you. It's like, well, what a waste of my time. So I think in that sense, I had a confidence to be like, just be honest with me. If in 5 hours that you don't have a sense of that you want to go on a second date with me, then don't worry about it. 'Cause I don't want to have to put the effort in either. So
awesome. Well, I want to hear about the proposal now. So who proposed? How did you do it?
You can take this one.
Okay. Well, I had this elaborate plan in my mind where I was going to take us on this journey of how our relationship has advanced, at like all these highlight locations of our relationship and have all these people involved. And then I had a good friend of mine that now I think back and I kind of wish that I really went for it. But a friend of mine was like, they're not going to remember that stuff. Like they're just going to remember you getting down on one knee. And so at the time I was actually living in Vancouver. I was a student and I still was running a business in Victoria. So I was coming back every weekend and I had a jeweler make the ring. So I didn't know the ring was going to be ready. And so I found out while I was there that the ring is ready. And we did about 8 months of this long distance relationship where I was coming back every weekend on the ferry. But our dates during that time was Friday. She worked a double. She would work at a breakfast restaurant in the morning and at a pub at night. And so I would work on my business for 12, 13 hours on Saturday. And we would start hanging out at 10 o'clock at night. And there's an amazing Italian restaurant in Victoria called Pagliacci's. And we would go out for pasta at about 10 o'clock at night. And so,
that or just like we'd order a bottle of wine and have free bread.
That's true, yeah.
So we were like broke. Even though we were working so much. I don't know how we were broke. We were working so
Traveling
much.
Back to Victoria every weekend.
True, yeah.
And so the ring was, ready. And so on a Saturday night in November, after she had worked a double, we went to Pagliacci's. I had the ring. I had called her parents and asked for their permission, like sitting in the parking lot waiting to pick her up after her double because I still wasn't sure if it was happening that night. And then at the end of our meal, so it's like 11:30 at night or something, I told her that I read an article that said that it's a good idea to go for a walk after you eat a heavy meal.
And like to know me, I mean, just based on what we've already talked about, like I am I have a strong personality.
Stubborn.
And so
just call it what it is.
Yeah,
okay?
I am very stubborn.
Yeah.
And so I was like,
no,
I am not going for a walk. It's November. It's freezing. I'm like, I'm not going for a walk. Like, I was like, I just worked like 15 hours today. Like, I'm exhausted. It makes for a good story.
Yeah, we walked down like through the inner harbor, and then we went down to the Parliament buildings, and it's all lit up with the lights. And then we kind of stopped at the spot where it was like she clearly knew what was happening, and it was like, okay, here it comes. And we just stood there for a half sec, and then we turned around and started to walk back. And I think in her mind, she thought, he actually wants to just go for a walk. What a stupid idea.
I was like choked. I was like, seriously, it's freezing. I don't have a warm enough jacket on. I feel gross after being in a restaurant for like 15 hours. Like, yeah.
But it was only because I was just quivering in my boots. Yeah. Like, how do I start? I don't know. What do I do? And then we took about 5 steps and I said, oh, hey, before we go, I got one question for you. And then I got down on one knee right by the fountain that's there.
Yeah.
And thankfully she said yes. And after a long day like that, I thought if she says yes now, then I'm in the clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was pretty, I mean, to be honest, I don't really remember what you said at all.
But you would have remembered if we had done like a big scavenger.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But you know what? At the end of the day, no, I don't know if like you should have, because at the end of the day, like it's still like it's such an amazing memory and we laugh about it and we joke about it. Whereas like, and if you had put as much effort, like a scavenger hunt in, it probably would be the same memory. Like,
true.
I think proposals now are just so intense. I'm like, don't spend as much on a wedding as you do on a proposal. I'm like, let it be you, let it be special to who you are. And ours was like that. I mean, the fact that I was super hangry, like that's very us. Like,
it's still true.
Yeah. So I think it's very true to who we were. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, proposals nowadays, yes, some of them are a little bit over the top.
Right.
And I think that loses sight of, what you're trying to do and that intimate moment that it's supposed to be.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I did like that we just shared it, just the two of us.
Yeah.
It was like we got this, to really share and revel in that moment. And then the next morning, because it was so late, so many people actually didn't get to be involved. There was no hey, we've got 100 of our friends waiting at a place for us. It's like, no, it's midnight right now. Let's go to bed. And on Sunday morning, we'll wake up and we'll celebrate with family and we'll have some friends over. And
I still have the photo from my BlackBerry.
Ooh, those were the days.
Yeah, it was quite BlackBerry.
Yeah, right?
But it was an amazing night and it was super fun and I will never forget it. So yeah,
it's all that counts.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, like the expectation put on grooms to be for proposals isn't totally fair either. Like I married a couple last year and she had gotten home from the gym and he proposed in their kitchen. And I was like, I loved it. Cause I was like, it's in those moments where you're most vulnerable and you're most, like everybody says like, oh, well, you can't propose unless she looks beautiful. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like,
friends of ours, he actually toted a piano out onto a dock on a lake and like played a song for her. And I'm like, wow, that's really cool. I mean, it's totally them. Like their whole life is the classic Instagram.
In the best way possible.
In the best way possible,
Yeah.
but like they live their whole life like it's an Instagram moment. Yeah, it's like I totally get that. But for us, we're like, this is us. And when I talk to couples about their engagement story, a lot of times with them, I'll celebrate the fact that if you could just pull it off and surprise her, take that as a win more than anything that she didn't know it was coming.
Yeah, especially if you're living together, especially if like life is so intertwined already that it's like, it's
hard to pull that off.
Totally. And so like, let it be what it needs to be. And if you want to go all out because that's who you guys are, then go all out. But if it's in your kitchen after you had a workout, then let it be in the kitchen after a workout because that's who you are too. So
I think it's important for the guy to really know how the girl would like that moment to be.
Totally.
Because like for me, if you pulled all the stops and you had it in front of millions of people, not millions obviously, but lots of people, I'm not going to handle that well.
No.
Like Canucks game on the screen.
It's definitely not going to go over well for you.
It's okay to talk about that. It's okay to have that conversation prior to getting married, like, or getting engaged, because how many grooms that you potentially feel really sorry for that it's like, oh yeah, like I was really overwhelmed or whatever. It's like, no, it's okay. Like it's okay for your partner to know that that moment is coming, because we had talked about a ring. I had shown options.
I was going to say, I think the fact that, I didn't take her ring shopping. I just said, what elements are you looking for?
Yeah.
But I let her have a say in that, because at the end of the day, she's the one that wears it. And in that engagement season, first question when you see someone, oh my gosh, show me your hand. Let me see that ring. You want to take pride in that. So I involved her in that process, but that's where the line stops.
Like I never knew.
Now you're not knowing what's coming
I knew
next.
that it was being made, and I was like, I didn't know how long it was going to take. I didn't know. And so I think to say like, oh, it has to come out of the blue. It's like, no, it probably shouldn't come out of the blue, because relationships naturally progress. And so
you should know where you're at in your relationship to a certain point.
Right.
Yeah. Especially if you want a positive outcome of a proposal. So
she said no. Weird.
How do you know? Never talked about it. So I'm surprised she said no.
It's only our third date.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about your wedding day. So wedding days, obviously, can be very, very big events, lots of stress involved, and lots of details that people spend a lot of time going over and trying to decide on. But at the end, being over 9 years now, that's since you've been married, what do you remember most from the day?
I remember most, there's a few for me. I remember getting ready with my girlfriends at my home. I had been in a couple weddings prior to getting married, and we had always gotten ready at like the salon or whatever. And I really wanted to get ready at my house. I'm still a big homebody. Like my home is my safe place. And so to get ready in my home, and it was summer, so it was like we had mimosas on the deck. Like it was just very much me. And so that for me was really special. I had five bridesmaids. So, and then, my cousin's little girl was there. And so it was just like it was fun. It was so much fun, and it wasn't rushed. It wasn't chaos. I did a lot of photos at the house, which was really awesome. So that was a big moment. I do remember driving to the church in the limo, and I was feeling like we were supposed to do an extra lap, to wait for people. And I was like, nope. I was like, I'm going to be on time. Yeah. Like I totally cut the plan. I think, 1 or 1:30.
We started at like 12:59. She's like, no, we're getting started. You're late.
Because you know what it was? I saw my mom got out, and because I was supposed to get out of the limo and literally walk down the aisle. And my mom got out of the limo, and I saw Lane, and I was like, nope, I'm ready to do this. Like, I want to do it right now. And so the wedding planner at the church was like, okay. And so she like closed all the doors and like got everything ready. I was like, I don't want to drive around again. I was like, I'm ready to do this now. And so so we started like right on time. Which is
still you.
Quite a bit of my personality. It's funny. Growing up, my mom always was late. Always. Which, if she's listening to this,
sorry, Vicky.
Yeah,
it's true.
And so I always hated that. And then my daughter now, I'm always late for like school stuff, and I'm like, I'm turning into my mother. But my wedding day, I was very much on time.
Yeah.
And then Lane and I didn't see each other or talk to each other prior to the day or the morning of our wedding. And so,
but a friend of mine had gotten married a few years before. Mm-hmm. And without either of them talking to each other, she had bought him a leather jacket and it was in the closet right next to his suit, and she had surprised him with that and had a letter in there, and then he had actually had like flowers and another gift sent to her. And so I actually had, do you know the brand Pura, the necklace? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, I'm wearing it today.
Yeah. So I actually had one of those necklaces that I had bought her, and I wrote her a letter, because there's lots of things that I would say to her that I'm not going to say. Like, we had 300 people at our wedding.
Like at the ceremony it was like 2, but yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah, we just, there's things that I would say to her that I don't feel comfortable to say in front of a couple hundred people. And I think that opportunity to write a letter that it's like, hey, before your makeup goes on, like, let some of that out a little bit, and then, hey, like, I love you and I'm excited. And
it was special.
Yeah, it was special.
So I wore the necklace around my bouquet for the day of, or the ceremony, and then the reception I wore it. Yeah. Which was pretty cool.
So I thought that was pretty cool. The things that I remember is we actually did our rehearsal on Thursday, and the wedding was on Saturday, and it was the greatest thing in the world to have a Friday in between, because on the Thursday I golfed with my guys, and then we did the rehearsal. We actually went to the hotel and did some decorating, and then on the Friday, on the Friday I actually got golfing with the guys and that sort of thing, and then on Saturday morning,
you went for breakfast.
Yeah, we went for a brunch in the morning, and then we came back. Like, it made it so much more low key. And usually at a rehearsal dinner, like, we went to the old spaghetti factory or something after, like, you're just stuffing in more pasta. It gives you kind of a day to be like, okay, like,
readjust, reset before the big day.
Yeah, I'm not excreting liquor out of my pores from the night before.
Nothing worse than a groom who stinks like liquor on the day of.
No doubt. Yeah, so we actually, the Friday before our wedding, the hotel that we got married or did our reception in, we got to go in and do all the decorating. And then it was actually me and Lane, some really good friends, my parents' best friends, my best friend, my brother, we all went for dinner casually after and had like tacos and beers the night before our wedding. It was awesome.
Yeah. So much more low key. And then,
I would say the moment that we saw each other at the wedding, that was pretty...
Well, right before you say that, what I was actually going to say is the other memory that I think anytime people have a choice is we actually had an amazing... this is before, they've got like 4 or 5 kids now. This is before they had like kids. So like we got in right before they don't do this anymore. But we had a live musician and his wife was playing violin. And they actually... in music theory... There's a theory that you go between a sustained note and then it resolves on the note. So it builds a lot of musical tension. Yeah. And so he was kind of on that tension building. And the way that the church is there's these 2 big doors at the back. And so one opens, all the bridesmaids come down, they close the doors. He's playing all this dissonance on the guitar. So there's lots of suspense. And then as soon as the door opens and she's standing there, the note resolves, and it was like your heart resolves, like the music resolved. It was so emotional and so powerful that I say anytime you can have that, have live music, because a good musician, instead of having like you walk down the aisle and you practiced it, you get to the end of the aisle and you're thinking, oh no, like we walked faster than I expected. And then you got the DJ at the back trying to fade it out. It's so much nicer to have a musician go, oh, like, you know, we'll replay this little section or we'll cut it off early and then we'll actually just adapt to what's happening. And it keeps the focus on people walking down the aisle, and it's less about the music and the DJ or sadly at these old churches, like we got married in a 150-year-old church.
Wow.
Yeah. Their DJ was about as old as the church. So we're like, I don't know if I want to trust you with an iPod. Do you know what an iPod is? Yeah.
We always say that. Spend money on good live musicians for your ceremony.
So worth it.
Yeah. So that moment was pretty spectacular.
That was special.
And then we had a great dance party and good food. And
the hotel actually had like a wraparound deck.
Yeah. So we had like cocktail
so there was a cocktail hour out there. But even when the dance floor got hot, it was like you could take your drink out onto that patio area. Awesome. You're downtown Victoria, overlooking the Inner Harbor in August.
It was amazing.
So we had a ton of fun.
I never once felt stressed on our wedding day, other than like what I just talked about. Like I was just very prepared to go. Our wedding day was amazing. It was the most fun, and it was not stressful, and
it was awesome.
It was awesome. It was great.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the first years of marriage. So were there changes or new responsibilities that you weren't expecting or that you were not ready for? And how did you cope with them?
So we never lived together before we got married because we were living apart. So when we got together or when we got married and we moved, That was huge because I had never really lived on my own. Lane he had been living abroad, and then he was living on campus while he was in school. And so we got our first place together. And I mean, all of those, you know, things, I look back now and I'm like, why did we argue about like taking the garbage out and like leaving a towel somewhere? And because
we were talking about this last night, we were saying we call them unspoken expectations.
Yeah.
So I always ask this question, like, do you towel off inside or outside of the shower? What would you say?
Half.
Yeah, fair.
Do like a pre-wipe and then hop out and finish off?
I finish off my legs outside.
Right.
So with my first roommate, I learned about unspoken expectations because I towel off 100% outside the shower.
Yes.
That's what those little mats are that you stand on, right? That's why they put those little towels on the floor. But in his mind, my roommate's mind, he says every time you put on a fresh pair of socks, right? Because you towel off and then you go put some clothes on, you come back, brush your teeth. That was his routine. So he's like, I've got a fresh pair of socks on.
And now they're all wet.
Because you toweled off outside, now they're all wet.
Right.
But it's an unspoken expectation because...
And I'm the same way. I towel off in the shower. And I think because also girls, they have longer hair. It's like if you step out of the shower, like you're dripping everywhere.
Yeah,
totally.
So
but with the shorter hair, you don't have that. And so...
But the idea being that, you know, you usually towel off that way because you were taught that way from your parents. Mm-hmm. So that means that most of your family probably does the same. And because it isn't a topic of conversation in your dating, you probably don't talk about those things.
Yeah.
So we were talking about towels on the bed was like a deal breaker for us in the first couple of years.
Because I hated that he would leave a damp towel on our bed.
Because we didn't have an ensuite. We were living in a basement suite. So our bathroom was separate to the bedroom. Yeah. So I would towel off and then I have it wrapped around my waist. I'd come to the bedroom, throw it on the bed to get changed. And then I would just be like, okay, like, oh, I'm late. I got to go. And I would just leave it on the bed. And she lost her mind a couple of times about that. So we've learned.
Well, I gave you like so many chances. I didn't lose my mind like the first time. It was like, oh, we've been married for 4 years. You think you could get your towel off the bed?
But it's with those things, it's meeting in the middle.
Yeah.
Her learning that it's like, is it really worth dying over this?
No.
But me also understanding that I can be trained. I can learn that it is, you know, a hot topic for her. And does it really matter where I put the towel? You can put it in such a way. So what I started doing is put it on the floor in front of the door. So even if I'm running out of the house, I can go, I got to step on this towel before I get out. I'll pick up the towel and I'll put it somewhere. Like I can be trained because I don't care where the towel goes. I should learn that we're going to have less arguments about something like that if I can change.
And the fact that he makes the effort on those little things, then it's like the days that it doesn't happen, it's like, oh, whatever, life goes on. Like, move on. Yeah. But I mean, I think we definitely had, like Lane talked about, like, you know, unspoken expectations. There is a sense in marriage that stuff just happens that you don't think would happen. And even to the point of, like, we were talking about this last night, like there's a sense of you're supposed to be the most vulnerable with your partner. You're supposed to be able to be who you are, all your flaws. And while that sounds perfect, it's not easy. And so there was definitely seasons where, you know, we were broke. And I remember once I went and bought these wine glasses that I had been eyeing up forever. And it was like, we are broke. Like I just spent food money on wine glasses that I really, really wanted.
And there was a time when I made a bid on an eBay item and I was like, I definitely won't win. And then I won and I was like, oh shit, what am I going to do now?
Yeah. And so.
But it starts to realize really in that situation, like I was so embarrassed and you call it pride and I have a hard time calling it pride because I think I have an image in my mind of what pride is. But I realized like I was so embarrassed that I had chosen to spend money on that as opposed to our relationship and just recognizing that I changed the hierarchy, that it's embarrassing to go to your partner and say, hey, I screwed up without feeling all this retribution coming at you. So it's, I think it's just understanding that it's, even if someone comes in that vulnerable state and says, hey, I made a mistake. Okay. Like catch your breath first before you go off the rails because at least they brought it to you. Cause trust me, that coming to the front and dealing with it might suck at the time, but that's so much better than it festering under the surface for years. And then you having a really nasty issue on your hands that you
or building habits. You know, those first few years of marriages, like you're building habits for the rest of your marriage. So if you continue to make poor decisions and you don't feel like you can be honest with your partner about those decisions, then it's not healthy. And I mean, it doesn't
feel like you can take on riskier things.
Right. Yeah. It leads to a pattern.
I have an inappropriate relationship that I'm having with somebody else. It started as, I spent money and I didn't tell you about it.
Yeah.
Because the best advice from a professor in my university that told me, he's like, affairs don't happen in like they do in Hollywood. It usually starts in confiding in somebody.
Yeah.
Emotionally, you feel comfortable with somebody else. And then down the road, if something happens, you don't just look at each other and your clothes fall off. And you're like, oh, it happened, right? But I think we expose ourselves to the risk that we will let something like that into our life and into our marriage if we aren't willing to be honest with even something that's so much more insignificant in comparison to something that is a marriage destroyer.
And those moments build such trust in your relationship. I mean, when you have those vulnerable moments and you say, like, I messed up, like I made a bad decision. Like I remember I bought those wine glasses and then as I was doing dishes, one fell off the counter and it broke. And I remember, do you remember
about that? Yes.
And I was bawling my eyes out because I felt so guilty that I had spent money on something and then I broke it. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I remember Lane was very gracious in that moment. I knew he was frustrated. I came home and he was like, we don't have the money for this. And then when they broke, I remember just like, that was the moment where like, I was like, I'm sorry. Like, I don't know what I was thinking. Like, and that moment, Lane was really gracious and was like, it's okay. Like, we just have to, stay focused and know what our long-term goals are and all those different things. But it definitely, it helped in that moment for him to be gracious to me, that I knew that I had done something that wasn't responsible or mature. And he was gracious enough to allow me to kind of work through that without feeling judged or, that it would be thrown back in my face later or whatever. So
I think that's awesome that you guys responded in that way when you guys approached a subject like that, where you felt like, okay, maybe I messed up. I did something wrong. Because the moment somebody reacts in a negative way right off the bat, that kind of makes the other person feel like, crap, I can't come forward because I'm going to get punished in this type of way for doing that. Yeah. And that starts to ruin that relationship. And then eventually, like you said, that person will start confiding in someone else because they don't feel comfortable doing that with their partner.
Totally. Yeah.
So I think that's super wonderful seeing that you guys handled those situations in that way.
Yeah.
Not always.
Well,
we definitely,
there's always moments.
Definitely had moments that it was like, oh, we didn't handle that very good. But
and I don't know if this is going to be a question that comes later, but like for us, we've learned that our communication style is we can be very explosive in the beginning.
Yeah.
And so we're like, we still have, I mean, it's been a few years from what it used to be, but for us, we're both very passionate in the stance that we take and the belief that we have on something. So we'll just go toe to toe. We're like just fuming with each other. And we've had a few times that like, I just need an hour. Like, leave me alone for a minute. I just need to think about this. But we always come back after that time that we've calmed down, where your blood pressure comes down a little bit. And then you say, okay, we actually still have to get to the root of this. Yeah. But sometimes it's the initial emotion that's kind of there. So yeah, like in those situations, we brought it to each other, but there was some explosiveness up front. But it's the idea that we came back to it later and said, okay, well, what can we do to ensure this doesn't happen next time?
Yeah.
How do you guys, seeing that you guys both have those types of personalities, how do you get past that and then come to a compromise together?
I think something we really try to work on, and we're not great at it at all, but is seeing the other person's perspective. So in arguments that, I can't understand where Lane's coming from. I can't get my head around where his thought process is or the why behind what he did or whatever. I really try. And sometimes I think it annoys the heck out of Lane, but I dig. I'm like, but why did you think this way or what? Because for me, being a very logical person, I don't do anything very often without thinking. Like, I am a processor, and so is Lane, but we process differently. Like, if I do something, I'm confident in the decision that I made, whether it be right or wrong. Like, I am confident in that. And so I think when we argue and I'm like, well, why did you, and even if I don't understand it, I really try to say, what was he trying to accomplish in this? Do I know? And like, again, I always come back to, Do I know that Lane is a good man? Yes. Do I know that he loves me? Yes. So when he made a decision that I didn't agree with, those I come back to say, well, his intentions are not to hurt me. His intentions are not to break up our family. His intentions are pure and good. That I'm able to say, while I disagree with you, I can understand what you were trying to accomplish. But that doesn't mean that like we instantly, it's like, okay, well, I understand, like whatever. Like
that's not our style.
No, like I'm Italian. So I can be very vocal, and we're both very stubborn people. Like,
and I think it comes from the fact that we're both very logical at how we arrive at something.
Yeah.
So to me, when a decision is made, I have a stance, I have a reasoning, I have a system that I arrived at why I feel this way. So yeah, a lot of times when we do argue in that sense, I think where our development has come along in that whole process is maybe in the beginning it wasn't as easy, but now like we're invested in each other's success.
Yeah.
And I think it's that really coming together as a team to say, okay, even though you made that decision, the longevity that you're making decisions for us, for our family, for the betterment of our future. So really like there's probably a foundation there that you made this hoping for the very best of our family. Right. It doesn't always turn out that way.
Yeah.
But that was the intent in the beginning. And then that pride side comes in where you're like, like I'd already made the decision, then I couldn't back out of the decision, and then it was too late. And next thing you know, it's like, oh, we lost a couple $100 on this dumb thing or whatever.
Yeah.
That was a bad idea, but at least coming with that understanding in the beginning now.
And we always try, Lane probably is better at this than I am, but, he always says to us, like, we are a team. So when something comes, in our life or whatever that we have to deal with, like it's dealing with it that we're both dealing with it. We're not individually dealing with. And so, that helps for me when I know that it's a character flaw, that it's like, okay, Lane, like here's something that you have struggled with for years. We know this about your personality or vice versa. And so here's an opportunity. And while I think maybe I take it a little bit better, Lane has a hard time hearing it, but it's okay to ask your partner to step up to the plate and to say, I know who you are as an individual. I know that you don't want to act impulsive. Lane is probably more impulsive than I am. And so it's an opportunity to be like, how can we approach this well? How can we approach this with the best intentions? How do we handle this? And so I think sometimes we often, we expect the best out of our partner because we know who they are. And it's like, I know that you can do this. I know that you can handle this well. But then I also think sometimes we have to be cautious because then we can be really critical as well. And so Lane and I really try to balance that it's like marriage should bring out the best of who you are. Like you should be the best version of yourself within your marriage. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't take refining, because as people, like we have character flaws in our life that take refining. And it means that the person closest to you, you should be able to be the most vulnerable with, but that also means that you sometimes need to hear the hardest truth. And that's been something in our life that, even coming home from friends' house one night and Lane would be like, hey, like, I don't think you meant it to come across this way, but this is what I heard. And it's like, oh, I didn't have any perception that was the way this sounded or whatever. And so being in a relationship where you can be honest so that you can become a better person is really important. And I think... And
to say it in a non-hurtful way.
Yeah.
It's like when I say something like that, I'm not trying to cut you down in your character. I'm just trying to tell you that from an outside perspective, it really sounded like this. And I know your heart because I know who you are. I'm sure you didn't intend for it to be that way, but it could easily be perceived that way.
Totally. Yeah. So when it comes to arguments and it comes to being communication, is we often really try to see the best in our partner, and it doesn't always happen.
The job, you never arrive. It's always a journey. It's the commitment to continuing to be committed to that process.
Yeah.
As opposed to thinking like, oh, I've arrived, so I don't have to work on this area anymore.
It's constant
communication
work.
is always going to change. Yeah. It's always different.
Regardless whether it's with your married partner, with your brother, with your parents, like whatever, relationships are relationships. And so having, the option to become the best self that you are is the most important. And to know that I could say to Lane, hey, like there's definitely been times where I'm like, hey, I'm struggling with this area in my life. Can you help me? Because I don't always know when I'm acting this way, or I don't always know that this is happening. And he is able to have perspective that I can't have. And so we really do try to be our biggest cheerleader for one another.
Yeah.
But again, that comes with refining. So
Love that.
I could throw another point in.
Yeah.
If we really want to go there, you can edit this out. You're more than welcome to. But if you learn to have those communication styles, I can confidently look back to being a teenager and say that I was a terrible lover as a teenager. But because we've got that dialogue now, after a really intimate thing that, a relationship shares, we can actually say to each other, I actually didn't like that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Like, that's good to know, because again, the foundation is when we're in a setting like that, my goal is to make sure that you feel satisfied. If you don't like that, then I won't do it. But you need to tell me that, because in my mind, I'm doing it because I think you love it.
Yeah, communication is so important in so many different areas in your relationship. I mean, it's so easy to talk about the easy stuff to talk about. I mean, it's super easy to talk about if you're financially stable. Money's easy to talk about. If your friendships with friends and your community is really great, it's easy to talk about that. But what happens when you are broke? I mean, living in Vancouver, like so many of us are broke. And so
what happens when you change cities and you feel like you have no friends and it's hard to make friends? Those are the real issues that you want to know, that you got someone that you can be honest with, that person isn't going to judge you and just say, hey, pull up your socks and go figure it out. It's like, no, I'm bringing this to you because it's a genuine concern. And it's hard for me. What can we do together as a team to say, okay, how can I cheer you on in this?
Yeah.
How can I not just solve your problems for you, but how can I get behind you to say, what do we need to do to, improve that area so you feel like you are making improvements?
Yeah.
What is a win for you? I hang out, I have a coffee date with a new person. Okay. And then potentially a friend. It's like, great. How can we do that? Yeah. Let's measure those things. And then how can I help you to feel like you're winning so that you no longer feel like that's an area of your life that you struggle with. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like communication you could talk about for hours when it comes to relationships, but I think it's also important to note that we also had to learn in our first few years of marriage, and we're still learning, is that when I communicate something, what's actually important is how Lane receives it. Because at the end of the day, if I'm communicating something and he's not receiving it the way that I'm intentionally meaning, then the conversation, there's no point. So I've had to really learn, like, to know Lane's personality inside and out, that if we're going to have an argument and he needs time, that it's okay for him to need time. It's okay for him to need an hour and a half to go to the driving range and to go hit some balls, because he needs time to process. And
I process by moving my body. Yeah. I exercise a little bit and my brain is rolling that around as I do that.
Yeah.
Because, and more often than not, males, we're not very good multitaskers. Right. I've always used this analogy that I'm like, you're like a conductor that sits on like a toy train set where you're controlling 8 trains at the same time. I am conducting one train. If you need me to think about something else, I got to get out. I got to walk back to another train. I got to get in. I got to, start it up and get going. So for her, like at an argument's sake, she's already arrived at, like, she's over it 10 minutes later.
Yeah.
And deep down, I'm like, I'm not over this yet. Like, I'm still annoyed that you don't see my point of view yet. And I've just learned that it's like, okay, I actually need a little bit of time to process that and then come back. So a lot of times we will just take a bit of a break if it's needed, where I can go do something and then come back. And she understands that at that point, I need to come back and talk about it, because if she leaves it where I've processed it, but I can't now decompress and talk about where I've arrived to, then we haven't completed the whole process. So I can't just go and be left with those thoughts. I have to come back and, kind of dissect what actually happened and let her know where I'm standing now. Yeah, right? Exactly.
And sometimes that takes like a few days. Like sometimes we'll find like we'll nitpick at each other for 3 days because we're still festering over an argument that we had 3 days ago. And then usually one of us will be like, what is wrong with us? Like, why are we like arguing and why are you irritated? Like Lane will be like, are you hungry? And I'm like, no, I'm not hungry. I'm mad about what happened 3 days ago. Like, and so we definitely, like, I've really learned recently, like also like picking when, if you want to have a discussion, pick the right time to have the discussion. Like 11 o'clock at night, not a good time to have a discussion.
Right after work when kids are hectic.
Yeah,
like
5 o'clock in the evening.
5 to 7:30 is the worst time of life for us.
So it's being smart about how you approach those situations. That if you're still festering 3 days later, okay, so then say, can we go for a walk after we put the kids to bed tonight? And can we just talk about this in a calm place? And
putting in the schedule to just say, this is a priority.
Yeah.
I need to talk about these things.
Yeah.
But I want you to be in the right headspace. So I'm going to give you pre-warning that we're going to go for a walk. We're going to talk about these things. And it's like, okay, I can make sure that now when we go on the walk, that I'm not divided in my mind and my attention. I can say, okay, like I'm ready to talk about this topic and these details. Let's talk about it.
And it's important to be self-aware that, don't bury the stuff that's hurting you. Like, don't I think probably couples hear this all the time, but it's like the book, The 5 Love Languages is so prominent in relationships. And I think it's life-changing for couples that read it. I think it's so important.
Life-changing if you do an analysis and arrive at a spot that you understand it, because there's a way that I receive love and there's a way that I speak love.
Yeah.
But if the way I speak love is not how she receives love, and that's where we got trapped for a few years, where it was like, but I'm telling you love. And it's like, but that's not the way I receive it.
Yeah. And even
it means nothing to me.
For those that are parents out there, like that's even important in your kids' relationship. Like we're learning that more and more about our kids every day, that it's like, oh, like Emerson needs me to act like this for her to feel loved and cared for. And so we still learn that so much in our relationship. But I think what's important is that you have to make sure that your partner is feeling loved and cared for in all things and in all ways, but also being very self-aware that if there's still something that's sitting in you that you're like, this is still really bothering me, then you need to be honest and upfront about it. And you also need to be able to say like, hey, the reason that this is still hurting me is because I'm not feeling fulfilled in this area of our relationship. I'm a big, for me personally, like words of affirmation and quality time are like my 2 big ones. And so having Lane speak, not like, you look great today, like, da-da-da, while that is really valuable and it's important for him to, like, for me to know that. But at the same time, it's him saying, I'm really proud of you. Like, you're working really hard. Or like, hey, like taking time out of his day to call and be like, hey, thank you for taking the kids today. Thank you for making time that I can go do this. I know. And again, like learned a lot of this from.
Just to say, we only learned this a couple of years ago. So,
but like, when we had our first child, like that first year was so intense in a learning process. One, we were learning about what it means to be parents and have a baby, which in itself is crazy, but also learning that like I had to learn, like Lane couldn't be cooped up at home for 6 weeks. Like he couldn't just work and come home. He had to like have time to go out, to go to the driving range. You can't tell Lane is a big golfer, but to go and like do things for himself because it actually made him a better person. And so we found that being self-aware to say, hey, you know what? Like I need an hour to just be alone or whatever. I mean, because life is very full for us. There is days where Lane comes home from work and I'm like, I'm just going to go have a shower by myself because I've
only been around kids all day.
Like, and so I think we both really work on also being very self-aware and also saying like, I've definitely had moments where I've had to say to myself, like, what is bothering me? Like, why can't I let this go? And then working it back to being like, oh, it's because I don't feel fulfilled in this area because I'm not receiving what what Lane has been putting out. I'm not feeling loved and cared for because there's been a lack in our relationship. And so I think really being self-aware is really important in a relationship because you can't tell someone what you need if you don't even know what you need.
Yeah. If you're vague in those details, that's not going to be helpful because if I already am letting you down in that area, you coming and saying, something's wrong.
Yeah.
Well, that's not accurate enough for me to know how I can help. But if you come and say it's because, and like words of affirmation are not easy for me. Mm-hmm. So that was a learned, characteristic for me to actually come back and say, I am proud of you. I need to recognize that she got her hair done and I need to be like, hey, your hair looks great. Mm-hmm. I have no excuse because I know her schedule. Like if we were dating and she gets her hair done by surprise, and I'm the worst. I don't know how women do it. They're like a half shade different. They're like, oh, babe, your hair looks so great. Oh, you look gorgeous. I look at her, I'm like, ooh, is it blonde or brown? That's like is the best I could do. But if she doesn't do that extreme, I am like hooped. So now the advantage is I know she's going to get her hair done because she's like, hey, on Saturday, I've got this scheduled. So like, I need to compliment this.
Well, and I think too, like, I definitely have moments where when we were dating and I'd be like, what the heck? You didn't notice? And I like did it. And it's like, first of all, I'm like, that is not something to build an argument off of. Like, guys just don't think that way. Mm-hmm. So why am I choosing to fight a battle that at the end of the day, like, it's not going to make me feel any better and it's not going to make him feel any better. But it is okay to say, hey, you know what? Like, I know this isn't your area of expertise, but I did get my hair done and it kind of bothered me that you didn't notice. Like, so for next time, like, because really the issue of that is that you don't feel fulfilled in that area of your relationship. So you're not being complimented on a regular basis. You're not feeling, full of self-worth. You need your partner to say, hey, you look beautiful today. I love you because of this. And so for those people that are like, he didn't notice I got a haircut. It's like, well, that's not the issue. The issue is that he didn't. The issue is that you feel not fulfilled in this area of your relationship. And then this was the tipping point that made you say, like, blow up and lose your mind over something. And so I think it's really important that you deal with the root issues of why you're feeling a certain way. Because I heard this from a good friend, and it was like, those root issues are like fish hooks in your soul. And like, they will just sit there and they will continue to bury deeper and deeper and deeper. You actually have to really work to get it out of you so that it doesn't continue to like wedge into your life and cause like continual pain. And if you don't deal with that, it'll just keep going and keep going. And so we really try to ask why does this bug me? Why does this? And bless Lane's heart. I definitely am like a digger and a picker. Like, I'll pick at that and be like, but why? But why? But why? And he's like, I've already told you why.
Yeah, leave me alone.
Yeah. But I think it's important that, one, it's important to ask to go deeper than the surface areas. But then I'm also learning that when Lane says like, no, that's it. Okay, that's it. Okay.
You
that's good. Yeah, exactly.
Respect that.
So, yeah.
I'm Jessica, and thanks for tuning in today to Love Unplugged, the podcast. If there are any questions or topics you'd love answered on the show, head on over to revueblanc.com and share your request with me. If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and share it with a loved one. Your feedback means the world to me, and the community we've created is what fuels our discussions here. After all, this is all for you. Join me next time for another Unplugged conversation.